Hey friend, in today's watercolor tutorial, I'm going to be teaching how to paint this watercolor landscape of Sequoia National Park in California. Without further ado, let's get painting. For today's tutorial, I'm using Burnt Sienna, Venetian Red, Van Dyke Brown, Olive Green, Perylene Green, and Payne's Gray by Winsor Newton. If you don't have Perylene Green, you can simply mix up say olive green, burnt umber, and a little bit of Prussian blue to create this Perylene green. If you don't have Venetian red, you can simply just mix Winsor red with some burnt umber even, and maybe just a touch of orange to get this nice kind of brick earth tone red. I'm using a size 2, size 6, and size 16 round Princeton brush, and the paper I've taped down here is a size 5 by 7 inches. To get started, I'm going to start with my size 16 brush, and I simply just want to wet down, I would say, the first 2/3 of the painting. So I'm just leaving a couple inches of a gap at the bottom for right now. And I'm just going to saturate this with some water, this whole surface area, and then I'm just going to tap lightly. A little goes a long way, but I'm going to just tap in some Prussian blue, and again, it's such a strong color, so just start really small, just tapping the tip of your size 16 brush in there, and I'm just kind of bringing it mostly towards this right area here, and then just a little bit towards the left as well. And again, it will slightly lift a little bit as it dries, but just a little is going to yield a good amount. All right, so from here, I now want to start to kind of build our placement for some of our trees. And I want to just use a little bit of Burnt Sienna as our foundational color for our Sequoia trees. So just using light pressure and mainly the tip of my size 16 brush, I just want to get a little bit of a layout here. So I'm going to start with this right side, and I'm simply just going to drag the burnt sienna down up until about this point here. Just like that. It's okay if it blends a little bit. Again, we're just trying to get the foundation down. If needed, if your page is really saturated with water, maybe let it set and the paper absorb the liquid for maybe a couple minutes. It's good to still have it slightly damp, but if it's like too wet, just kind of use your discretion with that a little bit. The next tree, I'm gonna start about an inch or so just above the bottom of this tree, and I'm just going to do a really thin line, just like so. There is nothing about a sequoia tree that is thin, but this one is way off in the distance. Sequoias are quite large. Okay, so there's the outline of sequoia number 2. We're gonna have 5 total. This next one here is gonna be slightly below this one, and it's gonna have a little bit of a gap, maybe about an inch gap. And I'm simply just going to bring this one all the way up. Okay, next we're gonna have one over here towards the left. It's going to be a little bit closer to the sequoia compared to this gap here. And I just realized that my phone is tilted with what I'm filming. I am so sorry. I'm glad that you guys could actually see. But let's just do a little adjustment here. Okay, that's a little bit better. All right, so if you made it through that, you're a champ. Okay, now that our filming is not angled, I am now going to do about an inch here, an inch there, and just a peep of that burnt sienna just slightly above. We're gonna have some foliage kind of cut in between. And then our last sequoia is going to be off towards the left. This one is front and center. This is the big mama sequoia here. So I'm going to start it about 1/2 centimeter towards the left side of the page. Let it slope downward. It's okay if it bleeds out a little. Again, we're going to be layering quite a bit in this painting, so. And this one, again, just about 1 centimeter from the edge of the page, and then let's bring it all the way like so. So it's about 1.5 inches thick. So yeah, you could see how much more in the forefront it's going to be. I'm going to drag it down just a little bit more. And the base, again, kind of slopes a little bit towards the right. Okay, so there's kind of our layout and foundation for the sequoia. I'm just gonna go ahead and let the foundation of the sequoia tree set and dry. So next up, I'm gonna take my size 16 brush and just get some more burnt sienna and just kind of do a subtle layout for our pathway. I'm gonna start really thin and then gradually curve it towards the left and then a little bit towards the right. And again, the base is nice and wide compared towards the rest of the pathway as it narrows out towards the top. And then I'll go ahead and just fill that in. Okay, so next I want to take my size 16 brush. We're just sticking with that for now. And I want to start to build some of our greenery before we move on to add details to our trunks. So I'm going to start with some olive green. I'm also going to add a little bit of water to my Perylene Green just so that it's good to go and ready to be used when I need it. So starting with olive green, I am just going to go along this edge here and just start to add a little bit of a wash almost of olive green. I'm gonna let some of the blue of the Payne's Gray pop through. So I'm just kind of leaving some textured negative space for that to show. You can see I'm just leaving a little bit, just kind of randomly popping through there. Okay. I'm just texturizing some of those areas. Just like that. And then I'm going to take a really good dense amount of olive green and just bring it on over on top of the tree a little bit. And I'm just texturizing it. Just like that. And next I'm going to just add a little bit more olive green into this watery area here. Now I'm going to kind of outline our area here just alongside this edge of the sequoia, the large one. Okay, and now I'm just going to dab some of our sap green along the edges here of our trees. Before I move any further, I'm just going to grab a little bit of water and just glide some water alongside this green edge here, just to create kind of a moody, misty effect with the green. And I'm just going to add some water around the rest of this tree. I kind of want to apply a little bit of wet and wet technique, but just being mindful to paint along the edges of our trees here. Alrighty, so I'm just going to tap in a little bit more sap green, and I'm just building it like so while this is still wet, allowing the green just to kind of bleed out. I'm adding quite a bit towards the tip top of this tree right here and just tapping it out slightly. And before I do anything, I also want to add just a touch of a little bit of watered down Payne's Gray. That is just going to add a little bit more blue back into our composition. And again, it's extremely potent, so I just tapped it in, and then I'm just kind of buffing it out a little bit. I don't want our Payne's Gray to get lost. You could also use Prussian blue if you prefer, but I kind of like the moodiness of the Payne's Gray in here. Okay. So next, I just want to add a little bit more water here in these in-between areas between the trees. Same thing that we did before, using my size 16 brush just to get a little bit of a wash going. All right, and then taking some olive green. Again, I'm just going to start applying it, allowing it to kind of softly bleed out. I'm gonna add some along this edge and then slightly up here as well. All right, and I want to add just a few bits that kind of pop and start to like texturize some of the green just a little bit. And I'm also going to add a little bit of green slightly overlapping on the tree as well. Okay, and next I'm just going to add a good amount of green, olive green, along this tree here. You can see the tip top of it, which is a little bit narrow, and I'm just tapping my size 16 brush and just dragging it slightly on the way down. I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of water just to smooth this edge out slightly. Okay, and then next I want to grab just a little bit of olive green again, and then just go along this left edge just to add a little bit of foliage here. and then just bring that all the way down. And I'm gonna just take a little bit of a concentrated amount and just add a few blots of concentrated olive green. I'm gonna add a little bit of that on this tree as well, again, just overlapping slightly. I'm gonna do the same thing in here, just have a few areas that are more concentrated. Okay, so next I'm going to take my size 6 brush. I'm going to use some Perylene Green. And with that, I just want to start to add some depth to our landscape. So I'm just going to tap in some Perylene Green while this area is still wet. You can have some areas where there's some larger concentrated amounts, but this is just going to add a good amount of shading and depth to the landscape. Add a little bit of texture here along the tree. And again, we will be adding detail to our tree trunks. Right now they look a little funny, but we will get there. So I'm going to add some Perylene Green in here as well, off towards the left. Just kind of blotting it, allowing some of the olive green to pop through as well. And you can even texturize some areas here, just like that. Alrighty, so I'm just going to allow the Perylene Green again to just softly bleed out and add some texture. So I'm just tapping my brush. Add a little bit onto this tree as well. Still allowing some of that olive green to pop on through. Adding just a little bit of texture along the edges of that tree. So before I add the rest of our greenery, I'm just going to take a little bit of Payne's Gray with my size 6 brush, nice and light-ish and watered down. And I'm going to outline the silhouette of a large rock in this left corner. And then I'm going to do another rock here towards the right. I think I said left there as well, or right there. So left rock here, a right rock here. And then I'm just gonna add maybe a second smaller one just right next to this one. So now that we have that kind of laid out, we can take our size 6 brush, and I'm simply just, again, same pattern, going to take this brush and just drag it down from where our greenery left off. And I'm just simply going to paint alongside the silhouette of the pathway here. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the left side. So I've just added a little bit of our olive green to the brush, just as a little base coat, if you will, base layer. And I'm just painting that again, just along the outlines of the pathway, the tree, and the rocks. And the silhouette around our tree here won't be perfectly smooth. I'm gonna kind of go in a little bit on the green just to give the edge a little bit of texture. Okay, so now I'm gonna take some of our olive green and then just kind of blot it to add some texture. And I'll do the same thing over on this side as well, just kind of building our greenery. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears from the size 16 brush to our smaller size 6 brush, and now I want to go in with some Perylene Green. And again, I'm just going to start building our texture. So I just applied a good amount here just below this area, and I want to do a little bit of separation. So I'm just going to pretend that there's some foliage here that kind of meets this dark shadow. So there's like an angle going off towards the right just a bit. Then from here, I just want to tap in some more Perylene Green. And I'm going to make sure I have a highlight in this region, so I'm not going to overpower the Perylene Green too much in here. But I'm just adding some Perylene Green over here, and I'm going to even tap in just a touch of Payne's Gray, just in this lower right area. And I'll do the same thing just below this tree here, just a touch of Payne's Gray, just adding a lot of contrast and depth to our landscape. And I'll add a little bit of texture just below our tree here, carrying on with some of the paint left on my brush. Okay, and then over towards the left before our olive green dries, I'm just going to add a little bit of texture with the Perylene Green, just like we did before. Kind of placing it just above where our rocks are going to be. All right, now I'm going to take a good concentrated amount of olive green, and I just want to go along our pathway here with the olive green and just texturize the edges. I don't want the edges of our path to be perfect, and so I'm just going to start with layering up a little bit of olive green along the pathway edges. And as you can see, I'm just kind of taking and pulling from some of the Payne's gray that I laid out previously, just to texturize the edges on top of that olive green. At this point, I just want our greenery to dry, and when we come back, we can add some texture to our tree trunks. So let's go ahead and get started on our trees. For that, I want to use my size 6 brush to start. And with the trees, I really would like to make sure I start with a little bit more of a concentrated amount of burnt sienna. And I'm also going to add a little water to my Venetian Red, so that way that's ready to go. And I'm adding some water to Van Dyke Brown. So let's go ahead and start with our Venetian Red. It's kind of a rust color. And for the trees in general, I'm going to start by doing a few just vertical lines, just like so. Now towards the end of this tree, it does curve out, so I'm going to curve out the brush strokes just like this, kind of following that general direction. And I just want to load up on a good concentrated amount. This is going to be a good base color. I'm allowing some of the color behind it to pop through here and there. But for the most part, I'm just going to take time just to kind of texturize the tree, doing this vertical kind of up and down motion. And you can kind of slowly start to see the texture of the tree start to form. And I'm kind of utilizing a little bit of that wet and wet technique to allow some layers of the same color kind of layer on top of each other slightly. And if you can see, as I get closer to the greenery, I just lift my brush up so I don't cover the greenery. So I kind of paint along that and around it as well. All right, and now I just want to make sure I get a little bit more towards the bottom here. Okay, now while it's still wet, I'm gonna add a few pops of Venetian Red, which I love this color so much. I think it's a very underrated color in the Winsor Newton palette, but I'm just gonna add a few brush strokes of Venetian Red. It's a very, it's almost opaque, like it almost feels like it's got a gouache feel to it somehow, even though I know it's watercolor. But it's slightly more opaque and more of like a brick red, like with some cherry undertones to it, versus Burnt Sienna is more of like a rust, like an amber rust color. So I kind of like having a combination of the two personally. All right, now I want to switch gears to my size 2 brush. Before I do that, I'm going to add just a little bit more water to Van Dyke Brown. I really want that color to be ready to go. All right, so now I'm going to get my size 2 brush loaded with Van Dyke Brown, and we're going to start with the left here. And I just want to make sure I'm going to build some depth using or contrasting dark to light colors with this tree. You can add a little bit of Van Dyke Brown in the holes of the foliage of the greenery. All right, so there's our first kind of element of shading. And I'm gonna layer up a second layer of some Van Dyke Brown, allowing some texture or color to pop through. And now I wanna kind of just add a little bit of texture, keeping on with kind of the curvature of the bottom of the tree. Hi, Mira. That's my dog. Sorry. Okay. Towards the bottom, I'm going to paint kind of like a crevice. So I'm just doing this tall triangle shape here, just like that. And then I'm going to do another little triangle shape towards the bottom. For some reason, I feel like Van Dyke Brown is one of those colors that dries out pretty quickly, but I love the color. It's such a rich, pretty brown. So I'm just going to paint along this curvy, jagged texture and kind of paint this crevice slightly going upward and down again. Alrighty. And now I just want to carry on mainly on this left side. Painting kind of around the greenery as well. And just towards the leftmost edge, I usually do just 2 layers of the Van Dyke Brown, and I'm going to go ahead and carry that all the way to the top here. I'm gonna add a few flecks of Van Dyke Brown in this greenery as well. All right, so now I'm going to take a little bit of water, and along those edges of the Van Dyke Brown, I'm just going to use plain water on my brush to kind of drag forth some of the Van Dyke Brown and just do that layered texturizing, just vertical lines, leaving some negative space and gaps in between to make it look more organic and irregular. And I want this area down here, this little crevice, to kind of be irregular in shape. So I'm actually going to go around it and just add a little bit of curvature to it, so it's not like this perfect triangle shape. And then I'm just going to texturize the remaining base using some watered down Van Dyke Brown. Now I'm gonna mix a little bit of Van Dyke Brown into some Burnt Sienna, just to lighten it up a hair bit. And I'm simply just gonna go and do some irregular vertical kind of dashes and lines to just get that really nice texture, slightly like dry brush texture. And I'm making sure to go all the way to the edges. I'm just gonna add in a little bit more texture with the Van Dyke Brown, more towards the first like left half of the tree, just so we can get a gradual dark to light gradation. And again, I'm just doing some loose texture, keeping it really simple. Alrighty, so I'm gonna go ahead and carry on this pattern for the rest of the trees, but before I switch gears with that, I want to add a few branches using the mix of Van Dyke Brown and Burnt Sienna. And so for the branches, they're actually kind of, well, they're quite dainty compared to the trunk of the Sequoia. I'm gonna do a vertical line that's slightly angled and cut off towards the left, and then maybe a little dash branch coming off of that, just like so. I'm gonna do a slightly lighter line that's mainly Burnt Sienna on this right side. Maybe it has a little bit of like a dash branch coming off of it. Can make it slightly thicker. Just kind of layering it slightly over the green. I'll do another branch coming off of the top. Maybe it breaks off into kind of like a Y shape. Okay, so now that I've added those few branches, I'll do the same thing for the other trees for the branches, just make them obviously smaller and to scale with the tree. But what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and add all the tree texture to the remaining 4 trees, starting with our base coat of Burnt Sienna, then layering on some Venetian Red, and lastly some Van Dyke Brown, mainly towards the left, and allowing the Van Dyke Brown to gradually go towards about midpoint, just to add some gradation, some dark towards the left and some lighter color towards the right, and just keeping up with that vertical texture. And then once that is done, we'll go back in to add a few branches. Now just taking that mix of our Van Dyke Brown with some Burnt Sienna. I'll just add a few branches. A lot of them are kind of sloping downward. Maybe this one's underlapped over there. I'll do a small one, just like that. And they're just kind of unique, not totally perfectly angled, just very organic looking. Almost like just upside down Y letters, if you will. And then lastly, I'll do one kind of thicker one coming off of this tree. Alrighty, now before I move on to any other part of the painting, really quick, I just want to take some Perylene Green and kind of texturize with some water on my brush in Perylene Green the bottom of each tree and just buff it out with a little bit of leafy texture so the trees don't look super like almost like they're floating and not part of the ground. So that's just gonna help in this awkward kind of transition area. Just texturizing some of that Perylene Green and kind of tapping it out with your brush. I'm using my size 2 brush for this. And then I'll just do the same thing over here. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of sap green this time and do the same technique, but over towards the areas of the tree that are slightly cut off by the foliage. I just want to add a little bit of texture around there. Okay, now I want to take a little bit of Payne's Gray and mix a little bit of Van Dyke Brown with it. And I want to start by outlining loosely, just kind of wiggling my brush left to right, using this dark rich color to get some texture along our pathway. I'll do the same thing a bit on the right side. Just loosely kind of wiggling my brush all the way up. And then I'm just gonna take my brush and just kind of drag it across to get this really loose texture. So I'm just using the belly of my size 2 brush to kind of drag some of the pigment using just a little bit of water. And when needed, I'll just add a little bit more of that color back in. Okay, I'm just going to add a little bit more shading towards the left. And then just lightly buff it out again, really just building and layering lots of texture. Okay, so now I want to use, oh, I like how I just got a big blob of the Van Dyke brown over there. All good. All right, just kind of wiggle that out a little bit. That's so funny. All right, now I'm gonna use that same mix of Van Dyke brown with a little bit of Payne's gray just to paint a wash, so with plenty of water, of this kind of earthy gray tone. Just like that. I'm gonna let that set and dry before I add anything else to the rocks, but that's my leather seat. Whoops, sorry. Scooting on that leather, you make some funny sounds with that. Anyways, I'm going to now use my size 6 brush to get some broader texture in our greenery. So I'm just gonna take first some sap green. And I don't want to go too crazy because I do like the soft bleeds of the green in here, but I'm just adding a few textured pops of, I'm sorry, it's our olive green. I mainly use sap green, but sometimes I do like to use olive green. So I'm just gonna add a little bit more pops of that olive green that's nice and vibrant. Again, I'm not going too crazy with it to retain that kind of watery watercolor signature look, but I'm just adding a bit here and there. Alrighty, and then lastly, I want to add a little bit of Perylene Green. And I'm going to add some into this area here because it looks a little flat. I want to just add a little bit of Perylene Green along this edge of the tree and just kind of right below there. I'm going to add some right below here as well. And then just a little bit of texture off towards the right here. So just layering up with practicing some wet into dry technique. And then I'll add just a few touches of it into our tree area, but again, not going too overboard. Just want some areas to have a little bit more texture. Alrighty, and before, looks like our rocks have absorbed most of the paint. So in the meantime, I'm just gonna add a little bit of shading to them. I'm gonna separate these two rocks with a little bit more of the blend that we made of the Payne's Gray and Van Dyke Brown. And then I'm just gonna add a little bit of texture to each rock here. It's okay if it's slightly wet and bleeds out. We just want a really loose texture here. So I'm just kind of randomly applying that color and then buffing it out slightly. I just want to add a little bit of texture in this highlight area. I just realized how potent that is. It's like super duper bright. So I'm just going to add a little bit of olive green in there just to tone it down. And just taking a second look, I'm going to add a little bit of shading of just straight Van Dyke Brown at the bottom of our tree here as it slopes near the trail. And then I'll just kind of drag that slightly upward just to buff it out a little bit. And then I'm just going to lightly kind of define this right edge. And then over here towards the left, I just want to give a little bit of irregular curvature as well with our tree. And then just lightly buff it out with some water, just to help smooth that transition a little bit. I'll do the same thing over towards the right side of that tree. And there we have it. Thank you so much for joining me for today's watercolor tutorial. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any further watercolor tutorials.